Alright guys, welcome to another episode of A Shot of Ruby, and in this episode I'm going to be showing you guys how to refactor and test the solution that we have. So I'm going to show you how to clean all this up as promised, and I've named the episode a little bit differently because this is not just about analytics for Redis anymore. It's more a focus on refactoring and cleaning up what we've already done. So that's why it's not exactly a continuation of what we did in the previous Redis series, but it is kind of a continuation. Yeah, I don't know if that confuses you or not, but anyway, so this is what we had so far, and you know, we're going to be taking a look at basically just taking all this and cleaning it all up. So what I like to do is, before I get started with a solution of some sort, I like to know where I'm going, right? So I call this process wish-driven development. Yeah, that's right. You make a wish and you make it happen, right? So I came up with the whole thing. So it's not like something like, you know, fancy or anything like that. It's just my way of breaking the process down into small steps and then just, you know, taking it one step at a time. So, you know, here we go. Like, I wish that we had an interface. So in the previous episode, I said we want to do something like track, views, uniques, right? So that's what I was thinking of doing before. And then I realized that this is a very, a problem which is related to an object, right? So for example, we're trying to track the uniques and the views of the post object that we have right here. So what I was thinking was we could actually clean up that interface a little bit. So we could do something like post.track and then views, and we need to pass in the data over here for the uniques. So I was thinking probably we could do something like uniques, and here we do the request.remote IP, right? So if we just do that, I mean, this is a good enough solution for us. It's really clean. Post track, so you're tracking the post with these statistics, right? The DSL makes sense, like the domain specific language, it just makes sense. So what this means is right away from our wish, if you want to call it that, from our wish we have a direction, right? So this gives us a direction. So for example, I know for a fact now that the track method needs to be something which happens in the post. So what I would do is I would use something like, active support concern, right? So it'll just be a mixin that I mix into the post model, and I'll just do the implementations later, right? So the other thing we need to do is we need to generate, these keys here, right? So so let's get started with that. The key is probably the easier one to do. So I'm just gonna get started with that, right? So I'm gonna go into the lib folder. So actually, before I do that, I'm gonna go into the application, and I'm gonna add this line here. So I already added it here. I'm just adding the autoload path. So here with the config.root/lib, and then I'm just gonna go into the lib. I'm gonna create a new file called Analytix. Yeah, with an X, because an X makes everything cool, right? Like X-Men or whatever. Yeah, I'm just going off on a tangent. Module Analytix, right? So here is where we isolate everything, right? So our analytics library is going to be isolated in this module, right? So first thing we need to do is we need to do the key. So I wish that we had some sort of interface that we could just generate the key for the object. So something like key.build for and then we pass in the the object, right? Or we pass in the method, right? Something like that would work really well for me. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start off with the module key, and then we need to do a def self build for, right? And here I'm just going to do the stat. So the name of the statistic we're trying to build a key for, and then the object, right? So that gives us a starting point. But here's what I want to do now. I want to actually do a test, because we know exactly what to expect from our key module. So we know what the output is going to be. So in this case, it's smart to do it the test-driven way, right? So I know there's been a lot of rage going on about TDD is dead and all that kind of stuff, but I honestly think that I think it really depends on the situation. Sometimes you're just doing code, like for example, what we did in the previous 3 episodes. I would never have done that in TDD style, but this now, like I know what to expect from this, right? I know exactly what's going on. I know the output that I need, which means I can do this TDD style, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm gonna go into Spec. I'm gonna create a new folder called lib. And in here, I'm just gonna create a new file called analytics underscore spec.rb, right? Coolio. So now we have that. I'm gonna go ahead and do require spec helper like we always need to do. And then I'm gonna do a module analytics and the first thing I'm gonna do is just describe key do end, right? What I want to do is like if we go and look at our code here in the lib folder, we need stat and we need object. So why do we need the object, right? So you may ask yourself that. So in the post controller, if we take a look at our key, we have the post ID, right? And we actually have another thing that we need from the object is which type of object it is. So we have this post thing over here. So if I want to make this key work for this key generator work for every kind of object that I have in my app, like videos, photos, or whatever, I need this to be dynamically generated as well, right? So I can't just hard code it as post because that will be the only thing that works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dynamically generate this. So I know for a fact that I'm going to need 2 pieces of information from my object, right? The class name, right? So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to create a mock, right? Let class name, for example. And here I'm going to do a double, right? Object, whatever it is, and then I'm going to do a name, and I'm just going to do post for now, right? So this is what we get if we call post.class.name. So now I just need to simulate the post object. So let post be double post ID, and the ID is just going to be 1. I'm just going to hard code that, right? And the class like that is just going to return the class name object, right? So that mock object that we created before, right? So now we know that, okay, we need these 2 information. We need the ID and we need the class, whatever .class.name, right? So it might be a little bit confusing where this is coming from. Let me actually demonstrate that in the terminal, right? So I'm just going to close out my server. I'm going to go to Rails C. Let's say post equals post.first. So post.class.name is going to give me that post, the name of the class that this object, is created from, right? So that's where this whole mock object is coming from. I'm trying to simulate that process, right? DHH has his beliefs about mocks. I think he has the right approach. I think he has the right philosophy behind mocks. That being said, I think in this case, we have a pretty consistent interface. Like, for example, the class.name method is never going to change. That's like a foundation thing built into Ruby. And the ID, every object is always going to have some sort of ID. So that interface is never going to change. So in this case, I feel that it's okay for us to use mocks, right? So if you don't understand where I'm coming from, go ahead and watch the TDD is dead discussion, which is done by Martin Fowler, Kent Beck, and DHH himself. So just Google that or YouTube it, look that up. So the discussions that I'm telling you guys about is basically coming from that, right? When do we use mocks? When do we use TDD and all this kind of stuff? So okay, all right, enough rambling. We have our mock object, and this should work, right? This should be fine. So well, what else do we need? We need a date. We need a date object, right? The stat is very easy. We can just pass that in. It's just going to be a symbol, right? So we need some sort of date because, you know, if we look at our post controller, we have this date.today.day, date.today.month, blah, 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 blah. So we need a date, okay? So let date.today. All right, so there we go. So we have now all the mock objects we need, I think. If we need more, we'll add it later. But for now, let's do describe. Build for do end, right? So what are we expecting to get from our mock object? What are we expecting to get? Well, let's let views key be something like, let's say we're expecting you know, the date dot year, and then we are expecting the date dot month, right? So date dot day. And we're expecting, well, in this case, we're using post, okay? So it's going to be post, and then we're going to have the number 1 because we're using the ID, right? And then the statistics we're tracking here is the views, right? So the views, so that's what we need, views. So now we can actually go ahead and create our test. So should create key for views, right? Something like that should work. End, and then we're going to do expect key.build for views, and the actual objects, the post object, I'm going to pass in to equal views key, right? So that's going to be our expectation and our assertion for what output we're expecting. So that looks good. Let's go into the terminal, and we're going to try and run our test. So bin our spec lib and analytics. There we go. So it's going to fail, obviously, because there's nothing to implement that, you know, that method. So I'm going to go back to the implementation, and I'm going to make it work. So, well, we need the date, right? So date equals date.today. That looks good. And what I'm going to do is, so I mean, if you think about it, all we're really doing is just you know, taking a bunch of strings and then just joining them with this colon key, right? So we can use an array for that. And so what we're going to do is date dot year, date dot month, date dot day, and then we're going to have, so we get the comma there, and we're going to have the actual object. So object, object dot class dot name dot underscore. Right. So why do we need to do underscore? Because, you know, what if the object is always going to come with a capitalized? So we need to make it all lowercase. So that's what the underscore method does. So now we have the object dot ID, and yeah, the stat. That's pretty much it. And then we can do a join using the colon, right? So that basically should return us what we need. So let's try go and run that again, and it should pass. Yeah, there we go. Look at that, it passed. Nice. Okay, so I think that's a good enough solution for now. I don't think we need anything more complicated than that. I don't think we need to test anything else, because, you know, the only other thing we want to test is basically you pass in a different statistic and then it returns, but, you know, it's going to be the same, right? So I don't think we need to test it. If you want to test it, go ahead and test it yourself. You know how to do that now. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. So the thing we need now is basically, we need some sort of you know, mix in for our object here, for our class here. Sorry. So include analytics and then model, right? And so what we're going to do here is we're going to implement that. So I'm going to go ahead and go into my analytics, and I'm just going to create another describe over here. So describe model do end. So module model end. So because I know that, you know, this is going to be a mix in that's going to be so what we can do is we can actually just use extend active support concern, right? And the method that we're going to use is called def track, right? So yeah, that sounds like death trap, you know, def track. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So now we have the track method, and let's go ahead and look at our wish that we had from before. we're going to pass in a bunch of stuff, right? We could be passing in just a symbol or an array, right? And we don't know how many stats. What do we have? 3, 4, 5 stats. We don't know how many we're going to pass in, but we need to make it support multiple stats, right? And the data that's going to come in is going to be different, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to use splats, right? Stats, splats, don't get confused. Anyway, so here we're going to have stats. So basically, once we have the stats splat over here, what's going to happen is let's visualize what this is going to give us. So when we pass in the views and the uniques with the request IP, the remote IP, what's going to happen is basically the stats is going to be equivalent to something like this. So views, and then another array, uniques, and then 127.0.0.1. So the IP could be anything, right? It's just generated by the request.remoteIP command and method, and basically, so this could be anything. Let's think about what's happening here. We're getting an array, which means we're going to need to iterate through it somehow. So imagine .each do stat. We're going to probably need to call some sort of method, because we need to interface with Redis differently for these different statistics. So views, all we're doing is just incrementing a key, right? So the key we already have, so this key here. So we're going to need some sort of method to handle these different data sets. So for views, we need to have some sort of method like call views. And here we can probably just do something like redis.incr, right? And key for .build for and views. And then we just need to pass in the object. So in this case, when we have included it into the post.rb, we're gonna just get self as that object, right? So this is an instance method, which means self is just going to be that particular post that we're calling this method from, right? Another thing is we need to keep in mind that we're never going to call this directly. We're always going to use it through the track method. So what that means is we can make this a private method, right? Same for the uniques, right? So for the uniques, we need to be able to call the method and pass in the data that we're trying to track. So def uniques, and here we're going to do redis .sadd key .build for, and then uniques, and we're just going to pass self, right? So we got the key. Now we just need, actually I'm going to use parentheses for this, and then we're going to need to pass in the data, right? So the data, just like that. So basically here is our interface to Redis, right? So we're making the actual call to Redis, and it's going to return us some value, right? So we could, in one method, we're doing 2 calls, right? So I want to take your attention to this thing with Redis called the pipeline. So if you're doing multiple method calls or whatever with Redis, and you're doing, like, for example, 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5, what we can do is we can use pipelines, and what that does is instead of creating 3 different or 4 different connections and calling one method at a time, calling one procedure at a time, it's going to use the one connection and do all the work and then return the result as an array, right? So before, in our solution, we were doing 2 calls. So this is 1 call, and then this is 2 calls, right? So what we're actually doing is we're going to optimize a little bit, and we're going to use pipelining to make things faster. And how much faster is it? Well, if you come to this page in redis.io, you're going to see that it's massive difference, right? So what we're going to do now is, because we need to iterate through our array, or our splat, it just makes sense that we would use something like pipeline, right? So redis.pipeline do. And that's pretty much it in terms of the pipeline stuff, right? If you want to learn more about it, go ahead and read the documentation. It's really good stuff there. So yeah, so we need to basically call this thing here inside of our pipeline, right? So now instead of us using this particular array, which is just an array that we made up, we can now pass in the stats, so stats.each. So here, now we need to do something in here which is going to handle that. Let me go back to the array. So it's going to handle this item here, and it's going to handle this item here. Now we have a bit of a problem, right? So the problem we're facing is we have this views, which is just a symbol, and this array, which is an array, and they need to be handled differently. So how are we going to do that? Well, one way you could do it is if stat.class.name.uniques, sorry, not uniques. I don't know why that came up with that. So if we use underscore, so we do something like that, and equals symbol, or we could do something like stat.kind of symbol. Then we do one thing. Else, if it's an array, we do another thing. In this case, I would use the hash selector pattern. So if you haven't seen my video on the hash selector pattern, you can go and look that up in our website. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another method called track for, and it's going to be basically just we're going to pass in the stat. So we're going to call here. We're going to call stat track for stat, and basically this method is going to basically return us, well, it's going to call the method that is one of these methods, and basically translating these things here into the right method, right, and call it in the right way. So this one needs to be passed an argument, this one doesn't. So we need to create a hash, right? And we can actually do this TDD style. So because we already have kind of like what we're expecting to call. In this case, we can actually use the test to help us with this track for method. So I'm going to go back to analytics. So I'm going to fill this out. So I'm going to still need the mock objects. So I'm just going to copy and paste that right there. And what we're going to do here is we're going to do dot extend model, right? So now we've gotten a mock object and we've mixed in our model module, right? So this guy here is now mixed in, right? This entire thing. So that's what we're going to need if we're going to test it. So then we have the, I guess we don't need to really pass in the date. We don't need the date in this case. So that's pretty much it in terms of the test, right? So we can do describe, track for, do end. And what we're going to do in here is based on the different keys that we pass in, it's going to definitely need to call the different methods, right? That's, so for example, it should call the views method, do end, and then basically we're just going to do post dot track for, and over here we're just going to do views, right? So now we should do post should receive views once, right? So what that means is the post should receive the views message once when we call track for views, right? So that's basically going to be our test. So let's try and run that. So exit. So bin our spec lib analytics. I'm going to run that. Okay, so that is now working. So it should receive views once. It didn't. We got called 0 times because there's no implementation. So now we have a failing test. So we can now go ahead and do the implementation. So before we go ahead, let me just add another test. So for it should call the uniques method do, and post should receive uniques with, I don't know, what's the argument we're going to pass in 127.0.0.1 once, right? So we're going to call the uniques method. We're going to, send the message uniques. We're going to call the method uniques with the argument, which is equivalent to that IP address once. So now we're going to do post.track for uniques. So we're going to pass in an array uniques, and it's going to have that 127.0.0.1, right? So now I'm going to do that. So now we have two failing tests, right? Yeah, perfect. So that's that should get us started, right? The other case we have to handle is, yeah, I guess that's pretty much all we really need to to handle. We have one case where it's just a symbol, and then we have another case where it's an array, right? An array and when symbol. So I'm going to go ahead and do the implementation right now. So we're going to do very simple. So we have one case for symbol, and we're going to have another for, so it's going to be basically a proc that is going to call one of these guys, right? So it's going to, we're just going to use send to do that, and we're going to pass in the stat. So it's, the symbol one is very straightforward. I mean, there's really not much to it, right? But the array one, so if we get an array, if the stat is of type array, so if it's this guy here, the first element is going to be the method call, and the second one is going to be the data we're going to pass in. So this one here. So what we're going to do is send stat 0 for the method call, and then the argument 1, right? And we need to have some sort of selector to help us select which one of these we need to call, right? So we're going to have dot. So one thing we're going to do is we're going to do dot freeze. So in Ruby 2.1, if I read somewhere correctly, that this is a good optimization because it's not going to create a new hash every time you call this method. It's just going to use like a cached version. So here what we're going to do is we're going to do stat dot class dot name dot underscore dot to sim, right? Dot call, and yeah, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it for the implementation. So let's see what happens if I run the test now. There we go, it passes. So perfect. So we have a working solution for track 4, which is test driven, and it works. Great. So now we just have the last thing we need to do, which is this thing here, right? So how do we test that? Pretty simple. We have 3 cases, if you're going to be really pedantic, but yeah, okay, so we'll do 3 cases. The first case is where we just pass in the views just by itself. And then the second case is we just pass this in by itself. And the third case is we pass both in, right? So for example, so I'm just going to go and write the test. So now I'm going to do the describe track do. So now we're going to do it should call the correct method when just symbol do end. So let me explain to you how pipeline works in Redis. So when you use a pipeline, what happens is going to call the multiple method calls into the Redis instance, and it's going to return the result as an array, always, right? Because I mean, if you're going to handle the result from multiple values, it's going to be an array, right? So what we have to do here is going to be post.track views. Oh shoot, views should equal 1, right? So when we get the result back, it's just going to give us the number 1, right? In an array. So yeah, And then the next time we call it, it should be 2. So now we're going to have, it should call the correct method when just array. Do end. So now we're going to post a track, and we're going to pass in the array, so uniques. And we're going to do 127.0.0.1 should equal true. Okay, so then the next time we call it, it should be false because it's already added it the first time round, right? And in the next case, it's going to be when we use both, right? We're going to call just views and uniques at the same time. Should return multiple results with multiple stats. Yeah, that makes sense. Do end. So we're going to post a track, and here we're going to pass in views, uniques, and then 127.0.0.1 should equal. So the first time it's going to be 1, and the second time it's going the second item is going to be true, right? So it's basically the combination of this one and this one here. So 1 and true, and in the second time round it should be views, uniques, and 127.0.0.1 should equal 2 false, because the first time around it's already added that IP address into the set, so it should return false, and that one should be true, right? As we've experimented in Redis, right? If you don't understand where this is coming from, go back and watch the videos. These are just the output from Redis. I'm not doing anything special. The only thing I haven't demoed to you guys is how the pipeline works in the console. So let's go ahead and do that. Rails C. All right, so I'm just gonna do a Redis database flush. So flush db, just so so we clear everything out and there's no conflicts or anything like that with the previous existing data. So what I'm gonna do now is gonna show you how the pipeline works. So redis.pipeline do, and here I'm gonna do redis.incr test, and I'm going to do another one, another command for Redis, redis.sadd test1, and then just going to add 127.0. Just simulate what we're trying to do. End. Bam. So check that out. It returned an array with the result, right, for each of the commands. So basically, that's what we're working with when we're testing, right? So if I'm going to go back to this thing here, basically this method is going to return us the output, for the different method calls that we're going to do, right? So that's why our test looks the way that it looks now. We could probably clean this up quite a bit. We could probably extract all this into like you use a let to extract all this out. For now, I'm just going to keep it like this, and then we're going to implement it. So if I go ahead and leave this and do bin our spec, spec lib analytics, it should fail, right? We should get 3 passing tests and 3 failing, right? Okay, so that should be okay. So now basically what we need to do is we need to use the stats here instead of our built-in array. So stats each do stat, and then we can just call track4 because track4 is going to call the right method for us. So what that means is we don't actually need to do the multiple line block. We can just use the curly braces like that. So let's try and run the test again. So I'm just going to go ahead and run the test, and I'm going to point out something which is happening in our test, which is quite interesting, right? So what's going on here is basically we're actually making calls to the Redis instance, like the real thing. So what's happening is that the test result is persisting through the test each time we run the test. So right now this is 8. If we run it again, it's going to become 9 and so on, right? It's just going to keep increasing Well, now it's 11, right? Because it runs twice. So what we actually need to do is we need to reset our Redis database. But if we do a redis.just flush db, it's going to flush out the entire database. So we don't really want to do that. What we want to do is we need to change the way we interface with Redis slightly within our application. So I'm going to go into the redis.rb in the initializers folder. And what I'm going to do is just change the way I call Redis, right? So I'm going to go into the gem file. I'm going to add this Redis namespace. I've already got it added here. So you guys need to add it, run bundle and all that stuff. I'm going to use a local variable instead of a global variable. And then I'm going to call it analytics equals Redis namespace dot new. And the namespace I'm going to use is going to have, it's going to be something like this. So it's going to be rails.env analytics and .join like that. So basically I'm just gonna have it, start off with the environment that we're working with. So in a test environment, it'll just be the test and the analytics. So I'm just analytics, something like that. And I'm gonna use Redis and pass in the local variable from here. So what this is gonna do is it's gonna namespace our Redis key automatically by default. So with every key that we generate, it's gonna give us these two, it's gonna prefix it with these two by default, right? So, okay, now what we can do is in our analytics, we can separate and isolate our Redis. So we don't use the normal Redis anymore, we just use analytics, right? So it's now gonna be specific to our, library, right? Specific to our application. So what we're trying to build here. And then down here, we're gonna use analytics, just like that. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is we need to reset this every time. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna use it before, do, end, and we're gonna do analytics. So actually, we need to get the keys. So keys equals analytics.keys, and then we're gonna select all the keys for our analytics data Redis instance. And what we're gonna do is we're just gonna analytics.del keys. So basically this is gonna delete all the keys for us before each of the test runs, so we get the expected test results. So let's go ahead and try and run the test again. But actually we don't have any keys, so what we need to do is we need to not run this keys so we need to run this only if keys actually exist. So if there's something in the database that we need to clear out, right, just like that. So now we run the test. It should work, fingers crossed. Yeah, there it goes, 6 tests, and they're all working. So we can run this again and it'll still work. So, so basically based on our test, everything should be working correctly now. So what that means is if I now go ahead and remove the old implementation, I should just be able to use this and it should just track the data for us right away, right? Like no problems at all because the test is passing, right? So okay, I'm gonna go and start Redis Commander. So cd Redis Commander. All right, so I'm gonna go back into the terminal, localhost 8081. And I'm going to do a refresh real quick. So I have the app running over here. I'm just going to go ahead and start my application in the browser and just do a reload real quick and see what happens, right? So when I click on this, it's going to now track that post. So I click, bam. So now if I go to Redis Commander, do a refresh, see that we have the development now. And if I go to analytics, 2014, 5, 12, post, 1 uniques and views. Awesome, right? So everything is working now. We refactored our code. We have a very nice interface to our analytics system, and everything is just dandy, right? So we have test and everything just works really great. So that is just this video has turned out to be longer than I expected, but I wanted to keep it in one part because I think it would have been If I broke it up, it would have just not made too much sense. So anyway, that I hope you saw the process that we went through in terms of designing our domain specific language, what I call wish driven development. And we just took that and we had a starting point, and we used that to create what it is we're trying to create. So it gave us a direction on where to go, right? So yeah, this concept, I created these series of episodes not just to show you guys how to create an analytics system, but the process of going through and creating something custom that is maybe not out there like as a gem or a library. And the next progression for this would be to extract all this into a separate gem. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed all that, and I'm sorry it was a little bit long, but I'm glad that I got it all through in one episode. And subscribe and like the video if you like the video. If you don't like the video, let me know why you don't like it. And yeah, one more thing before I go is one of the users on YouTube asked how the data should be backed up in Redis, like whether he should put it in Postgres or something, to make sure that it's persisted. So here's the thing with working with Redis, right? Everything is saved asynchronously into disk anyway. So it first saves it into memory and then it saves it into disk. So what you can do is you can actually back up your Redis database, right? At least the one that is in the disk. If your data is still in the memory and something goes wrong, like your virtual machine shuts down for whatever reason, you're going to lose this data in the memory, but you're not going to lose the data in the disk. So you can keep your data in your disk, cached, like you can keep it like backed up somewhere. Or if you really want to go down that road of asynchronously, like every time you make a call, you can create some sort of delayed job using Sidekick or something that will copy that analytics data into your Postgres database. You could do that too. I don't see a reason why, because in both cases, if it's just writing to memory and something happened before it got written to disk, you're going to lose that data anyway. So I would say you don't really need to back it up into Postgres, but just make sure that you back up the actual Redis database, itself, that the image that Redis writes to. So yeah, with that, subscribe and like the video to show your support, and thanks.